The massive crystalline doors of the Galactic Council's Supreme Chamber hissed open with a sound like dying stars. Ambassador David Kane stepped through the threshold, his simple black diplomatic uniform a stark contrast to the overwhelming grandeur that surrounded him. The chamber itself defied human understanding, a structure suspended in the void between three neutron stars, its walls pulsing with the combined consciousness of 1,000 civilizations. The sight that greeted him would have driven lesser minds to madness. Rising in perfect geometric spirals around the chamber's central floor were tiers upon tiers of alien representatives. Each species occupied seats designed for their unique physiology: crystalline matrices for the Silicon Collective, gravity wells for the Void Dwellers, energy containment fields for beings of pure plasma. The air itself seemed alive, thick with pheromones, electromagnetic fields, and psychic emanations from creatures that had evolved under alien suns. David's footsteps echoed as he walked across the obsidian floor toward the center of the chamber. Every eye, sensor, and perceptual organ in the vast space focused on him with predatory intensity. He was the first human to ever stand in this place, the first member of his species to face the tribunal that governed the affairs of 947 civilizations across 17 galaxies. At the apex of the chamber, seated on a throne carved from a single neutron star fragment, was Supreme Counselor Veltar of the Ancient Dominion. The being was old, so old that its species had achieved interstellar travel when most of the galaxy was still cooling primordial rock. Its form shifted constantly between states of matter, sometimes appearing as crystallized energy, other times as living metal, occasionally as something that human eyes couldn't properly process. Human, Veltar's voice resonated through the chamber's quantum translation matrix, each word carrying harmonics that made the crystalline walls sing. You stand accused of the most serious crime in galactic law, the unauthorized manipulation of fundamental forces. Your species has been detected conducting experiments that threaten the stability of local space-time. How do you answer these charges? David stood perfectly still, his hands clasped behind his back in a pose of respectful attention. Around the chamber, representatives leaned forward in anticipation. This was a historic moment, the first time in Council history that a species younger than 10 million years had been brought before the full assembly on charges of cosmic-level violations. Supreme Counselor, David replied, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber despite its vast size. I answer with a question of my own. When did this council decide that curiosity had become a crime? A ripple of shock passed through the assembly. No one addressed the council with such directness. Protocol demanded submission, acknowledgement of their authority, pleas for mercy. Instead, this human was challenging their fundamental premise. Representative Kolthek of the Hive Consortium rose from his position, his insectoid form clicking with agitation. Curiosity? You call the destabilization of entire stellar regions mere curiosity? Your experiments with quantum cascade reactions nearly collapsed the Rigel system into a black hole. David nodded calmly. And yet Rigel still burns, doesn't it? In fact, our calculations show it will burn for precisely 847,000 years longer than it would have naturally. We didn't destabilize the system, we stabilized it. The silence that followed was deafening. Representatives began checking their own data, confirming what the human claimed. The readings were correct, impossible but correct. Rigel's stellar output had indeed been optimized, its fusion processes refined to burn cleaner and longer. Counselor Zethrai of the Crystal Hierarchies spoke next, her form refracting light into rainbow patterns as she moved. Even if your intentions were beneficial, you acted without council approval. No species may conduct experiments that affect interstellar environments without proper authorization. Authorization from whom? David asked, and for the first time, a slight smile played at the corners of his mouth. From a council that represents civilizations we've never been invited to join. From authorities who govern territories we've never been allowed to enter. You claim jurisdiction over humanity based on laws we've never agreed to follow. The chamber erupted into chaos. Representatives from dozens of species began speaking at once, their various languages creating a cacophony of sound that the translation matrix struggled to process. Some demanded immediate punishment for such insolence. Others called for diplomatic immunity to be granted so negotiations could proceed. A few simply sat in stunned silence, processing the implications of what they'd heard. Supreme Counselor Veltar raised one appendage, and the chamber fell silent instantly. His authority was absolute, backed by the combined military might of nearly 1,000 civilizations. "Human," he said slowly, "you speak as though your species has a choice in these matters. Your world exists within Council territory. Your people breathe Council-regulated atmosphere. You are subject to our authority whether you acknowledge it or not." David's smile widened slightly. "Respectfully, Supreme Counselor, I must disagree. Earth exists within our territory. The Sol system was claimed by humanity long before we knew galactic civilization existed. As for breathing Council-regulated atmosphere, well, that would imply the Council actually knew where Earth was located." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Every being in the chamber knew the location of every inhabited world in their territory. The Council's survey fleets had mapped every system, catalogued every species, established contact with every civilization. The idea that a spacefaring species could exist without their knowledge was absurd. Representative Thokvul of the Machine Collective processed the statement and responded with mechanical precision. "Our records indicate Earth's location as Sol System, Orion Arm, Sector 7741. Terran civilization was first contacted 847 standard cycles ago." David shook his head slowly. "I'm afraid your records are incorrect. What you contacted 847 cycles ago was a single human exploration vessel, roughly equivalent to what my people would call a fishing boat. The crew was instructed to play along with your first contact protocols while gathering intelligence about galactic civilization." He paused, letting the implications sink in before continuing. "You see, humanity has been aware of your existence for far longer than you've been aware of ours. We've been watching, learning, preparing. The question isn't whether we're subject to your authority. The question is whether you're prepared for what comes next." For the first time in the Council's recorded history, Supreme Counselor Veltar looked uncertain. The being who had presided over the galaxy's governance for millennia found himself facing a possibility he'd never considered, that somewhere out there was a civilization that had been studying them while remaining completely hidden from their view. "Ambassador Kane," Veltar said finally, his voice carrying new undertones of caution. "What exactly are you suggesting?" David's expression grew serious, all traces of his earlier smile vanishing. "I'm suggesting that you've been operating under false assumptions about humanity's capabilities and intentions. I'm suggesting that the experiments you detected weren't violations of your laws. They were demonstrations of our technology. And I'm suggesting that this Council needs to decide very quickly whether it wants humanity as an ally or as something else entirely." The chamber fell silent once more, but this time the silence carried weight, the weight of decisions that could reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. In the space of a few minutes, humanity had transformed from accused criminals to potential threats to possible partners. The Council members looked at each other with growing unease, each wondering what other surprises this mysterious species might have in store. The holographic display that materialized above Ambassador David Kane showed something that made every being in the Galactic Council chamber question their understanding of reality. It was Earth, but not the primitive blue world they had catalogued in their databases. This Earth pulsed with geometric patterns of energy that hurt to look at directly. Massive structures orbited the planet in perfect formation, each one registering on sensors as both solid matter and pure energy simultaneously. "Impossible," whispered Representative Kolthek, his insectoid form clicking rapidly with agitation. "Our surveillance networks monitor all inhabited worlds. This is not the Earth in our records." David walked slowly around the holographic projection, his movements deliberate and calm. "Your surveillance networks see exactly what we allow them to see. For the past 8 centuries since our first detection of galactic civilization, we've been conducting the most comprehensive intelligence operation in recorded history." Supreme Counselor Veltar leaned forward on his neutron star throne, his form shifting between energy states as his ancient mind processed the implications. "What kind of operation?" "The kind where a supposedly primitive species learns everything possible about its neighbors while revealing nothing about itself," David replied. "Did you know that every single human you've encountered over the past 8 centuries has been an artificial construct? Biological, yes, but synthetic. Each one designed to reinforce your preconceptions about our capabilities. The chamber erupted in chaos as representatives began shouting in languages that hadn't been spoken for millennia. The crystalline beings of the Silicon Collective rang like broken bells. The gas cloud entities of the Nebula Federation swirled in frantic patterns. Even the normally stoic Machine Collective showed signs of processing overload. Silence. Veltar's voice boomed through the neural amplifiers, causing several smaller species to temporarily lose consciousness. You claim that humanity has been conducting deception spanning 8 centuries? Not deception, David corrected. Strategic intelligence gathering. Every technology you've shared with our constructs, every political alliance you've offered, every military secret you've revealed thinking we were too primitive to understand, all of it has been cataloged, analyzed, and improved upon. He gestured and the hologram zoomed in on Luna. Earth's moon no longer appeared as a barren rock but as a massive technological marvel covered in geometric structures that pulsed with energy patterns unknown to galactic science. The moon houses our primary research facilities. We've been developing technologies using principles your own scientists claimed were impossible. Counselor Zethrai's crystalline form fractured light into desperate patterns. Show us your ships. If you possess such technology, show us your fleet. David's smile returned, but this time it carried no warmth. Ships? You still think in such limited terms. The holographic display expanded to show the entire Sol system. What it revealed challenged every assumption about space-based engineering. Mars had been transformed into a ring-shaped construct that orbited the sun in impossible geometries. The asteroid belt was gone, replaced by a perfectly ordered grid of structures, each one registering as a gravitational anomaly. We don't build ships, David explained conversationally. We reshape reality. Those structures you see aren't constructed. They're grown from the fundamental forces of the universe itself. Each one operates on principles that your physics considers theoretical impossibilities. Representative Thokvul of the Machine Collective processed this information with mechanical precision. Gravitational manipulation on this scale would require the energy output of multiple stars. The calculations show exactly what we wanted you to calculate, David interrupted. Tell me, when was the last time any of your species actually visited the Sol system? The silence that followed was telling. For all their surveillance networks and intelligence gathering, none of the Council species had thought to physically visit what they considered a backward system inhabited by primitives. The hologram shifted again, focusing on Sol itself. But this was not the yellow dwarf star that had burned for billions of years. The sun was now encased in a massive geometric shell that pulsed with controlled fusion reactions, harvesting every joule of energy the star produced. A Dyson sphere, breathed Counselor Zethrai. The foundation of Type 2 civilization, David confirmed. We've been harvesting our star's complete energy output for the past 3 centuries. Every photon that Sol produces now serves humanity's expansion into the galaxy. Supreme Counselor Veltar's ancient mind raced through possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. The energy requirements for faster-than-light travel at this scale, the infrastructure needed for galactic operations, it would take centuries of preparation, David nodded, which we've had, while you've been focused on territorial disputes and trade wars. We've been quietly building the foundation for true galactic civilization. The display showed streams of energy connecting Sol to distant points of light. Other star systems, some within Council territory, others in regions supposedly unexplored. We call it the network. A galaxy-spanning infrastructure that connects every system we've deemed worthy of preservation. Representative Kolthek's clicking intensified to a frantic rhythm. Worthy of preservation? You speak as though you have authority over star systems you've never claimed. David's expression grew serious. Authority isn't claimed, it's demonstrated. For the past 8 centuries, humanity has been the galaxy's silent guardian. When the Rigel system began showing signs of stellar instability, we stabilized it. When the Vega colonies faced ecological collapse, we restored their biospheres. When the trade routes through the Cygnus Arm became too dangerous due to dark matter storms, we cleared them. The hologram displayed dozens of interventions, stellar engineering projects, ecological restorations, infrastructure improvements, all attributed to unknown forces or natural phenomena in Council records. "You've been manipulating galactic civilization for centuries," Veltar said, his voice carrying new undertones of fear. "We've been maintaining it," David corrected. "Do you know how many species have faced extinction in the past 8 centuries? How many wars have been prevented? How many civilizations have been saved from their own short-sightedness?" The numbers appeared in the hologram. Hundreds of civilizations preserved, thousands of conflicts resolved, countless lives saved, all through subtle intervention, all without the affected species ever knowing they'd been helped. "What do you want from us?" Veltar asked, his voice barely above a whisper. David stepped closer to the center of the chamber, his presence somehow seeming larger, despite his physical size. "I want you to understand what you've been governing. You see the galaxy as a collection of separate civilizations competing for resources. We see it as a single system that requires careful management to reach its potential." The hologram expanded, to show the entire galaxy, but not as the Council knew it. This view revealed hidden connections, energy flows between distant stars, transportation networks that bypassed normal space entirely. It was a vision of the galaxy as a unified organism, with humanity as its nervous system. "The Council has served its purpose," David continued. "It maintained basic order during the galaxy's adolescence. But adolescence ends. It's time for galactic civilization to mature, and that requires different leadership." The silence in the chamber was absolute. Even the background hum of life, support systems seemed to quiet in the face of what they were hearing. "You're demanding we surrender authority to humanity," Councillor Zethrai said. David shook his head. "I'm informing you that authority has already changed hands. The question is whether this transition happens peacefully or requires more direct intervention. We prefer cooperation, but we're prepared for either outcome." As if summoned by his words, new readings appeared on every sensor in the chamber. Unknown energy signatures were materializing throughout Council space, not ships, but structures that registered as impossibilities. The galaxy's hidden infrastructure was revealing itself, and with it humanity's true capabilities. The emergency alerts began screaming through the Council chamber, as sensors detected something that should have been impossible. Space itself was unfolding around their station, reality bending as massive structures materialized from dimensions that existed beyond normal physics. The defensive shields that could withstand supernova blasts powered up automatically, their energy barriers forming protective shells around the chamber. None of it mattered. Human ships, if they could be called ships, passed through the Council's most advanced defenses as if they were made of paper. These weren't vessels in any sense that galactic civilization understood. They were geometric impossibilities, structures that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the 3-dimensional space around them, surfaces folded back on themselves in patterns that made optical sensors fail and caused severe disorientation in organic beings. Ambassador David Kane stood calmly in the center of the chamber while chaos erupted around him. Representatives scrambled for emergency protocols that had never been needed in the Council's million-year history. Some species began preparing for evacuation, while others activated personal defense systems that had been considered ceremonial decorations. "What are those things?" Supreme Councillor Veltar's voice carried notes of panic that had not been heard from him in millennia. "Representatives of human engineering," David replied casually. "Also a practical demonstration. You wanted to know about our capabilities. Now you're seeing them firsthand." One of the impossible vessels positioned itself directly above the chamber, its shadow falling across the assembly like the finger of some cosmic entity. Through the transparent aluminum ceiling, its presence warped light and gravity simultaneously. Sensor readings showed it was both 1 kilometer long and infinite in size, composed of matter that existed in quantum superposition. Suddenly, every communication device in the chamber activated at once. The voice that emerged wasn't transmitted through speakers. It resonated directly in the consciousness of every being present, regardless of their species' method of perception. "Greetings, Council." The voice was unmistakably human but carried harmonics that suggested vast intelligence and computational power beyond biological limitations. I am Admiral Lisa Park of the Human Stellar Coordination Fleet. I bring a message about recent developments. Veltar struggled to maintain his composure as his ancient mind raced through possibilities. What developments? 1 hour ago, our monitoring systems detected a massive fleet mobilizing from 17 different Council worlds, Admiral Park's voice explained. Analysis of their trajectory and weapon signatures indicated hostile intent toward the Sol system. This was naturally unacceptable. The holographic display above David shimmered and showed real-time images from across the galaxy. Massive armadas of alien warships hung motionless in space around their homeworlds, their crew unconscious, their weapon systems dark. Where are their crews? Demanded Representative Kolthek. Safe, Admiral Park replied, currently experiencing what humans call accelerated consciousness simulation. They believe they are continuing with their missions against Earth. In their perception, they have successfully destroyed the Sol system and are returning home as heroes. The experience feels completely real to them. David nodded approvingly. Temporal consciousness manipulation. We isolate their awareness in accelerated time streams where they can experience their fantasy of victory while their bodies remain in suspended animation. From their perspective, they've completed successful missions. That's impossible, protested Counselor Zethrai. Consciousness cannot be extracted and manipulated like data. The quantum mechanics alone. Follow laws that we've rewritten, David interrupted. When you can manipulate the fundamental constants of reality, consciousness becomes just another form of information to be processed. The impossible ships above them pulsed with energy that registered simultaneously as electromagnetic radiation, gravitational waves, and something that their sensors couldn't classify because it transcended known physics. We've spent 8 centuries studying every species in this galaxy, Admiral Park continued. Your neurological structures, your thought patterns, your deepest fears and greatest desires. Creating believable virtual experiences for each crew member was trivial. Images flashed across the holographic display, detailed brain maps of dozens of alien species, psychological profiles, behavioral analyses. The depth of information was staggering. Humanity knew more about some species than they knew about themselves. You've been studying us like laboratory specimens, Representative Thakvul said, his mechanical voice carrying overtones of violation. We've been understanding you, David corrected, just as you've attempted to understand us. The difference is our methods are more effective. Veltar's form shifted between energy states as desperation overcame ancient dignity. What do you want us to do? Surrender our fleets? Abandon our territories? David shook his head. Nothing so dramatic. We want you to evolve beyond your current limitations. The hologram shifted to show a vision that took the breath away from every being present. Star systems connected by streams of pure energy. Worlds transformed into garden paradises supporting impossible numbers of inhabitants. Space itself reshaped to sustain life on scales never before imagined. Ships that were living ecosystems carried entire biospheres between stars. This is what the galaxy could become, Admiral Park's voice explained. A single unified civilization spanning multiple star groups. Every species contributing their unique capabilities, every world optimized for maximum life support. War, scarcity, extinction, all relegated to historical curiosities. Under human control, Veltar said bitterly. Under competent management, David replied. We don't seek to rule you. We seek to guide galactic civilization toward its potential. There's a significant difference. The impossible ships pulsed again, and suddenly every being in the chamber experienced something unprecedented. For a brief moment, their consciousness touched something vast and alien yet unmistakably benevolent. It was as if a gentle hand had reached into their minds and shown them possibilities they had never imagined. We've evolved beyond the need for dominance, Admiral Park continued. What drives humanity now is curiosity, creativity, and the desire to see life flourish on the grandest possible scale. We offer partnership, not subjugation. David stepped forward, his expression becoming earnest. The hostile fleets weren't just military threats. They were symptoms of a dying governmental system. The Council has reached the limits of what competitive thinking can achieve. You need to learn cooperation on a scale that transcends individual species. And if we refuse to learn, asked Counselor Zethrai. The ships above began to fade back into folded space, reality healing around their departure like water closing over dropped stones. Then you'll have eternity to reconsider that choice, Admiral Park replied, her voice growing distant. But locked in temporal suspension until you're ready to participate constructively. David began to shimmer as a transport beam engaged, his form becoming translucent. As he started to dissolve, he spoke one final time. You have 6 hours to reach consensus. Choose wisely, this is the last time we'll ask politely. The communication ended, leaving the council members alone with their thoughts and fears. Outside the chamber's windows, the galaxy continued its ancient dance, but now they knew they were no longer its choreographers. The Galactic Council chamber had never experienced such profound silence. For the first time in its million-year history, the governing body of nearly 1,000 civilizations found itself paralyzed by a decision that could reshape the fundamental nature of existence itself. Representatives sat in stunned quiet, each grappling with the impossible choice humanity had presented them. 5 hours had passed since Ambassador David Kane's departure. Emergency sessions had been called, private consultations held, ancient treaties reviewed. None of it provided guidance for dealing with a species that had spent centuries secretly becoming the galaxy's puppet master. Supreme Counselor Veltar finally broke the silence, his ancient voice carrying the weight of eons, show of appendages, all in favor of accepting humanity's terms. Every hand, claw, tentacle, energy field, and manipulator appendage in the chamber rose simultaneously. The vote was unanimous. Well, said Counselor Zethrai with what might have been relief in her crystalline voice, that was decisive. The quantum communicator at the chamber's center activated without any input from the council. David Kane's voice emerged, though he was nowhere to be seen. Wise decision, he said simply. The transition begins immediately. What happened next would be remembered as the most profound transformation in galactic history. Space around every inhabited world shimmered as massive constructs materialized. Not ships or stations, but something far more ambitious. Each construct was perfectly designed for its target world's specific needs. Atmospheric processors for polluted planets, gravity regulators for unstable systems, energy distribution networks that tapped directly into stellar cores. On the council station, representatives watched in awe as their homeworld communications showed the transformation beginning. Worlds that had struggled with resource depletion suddenly found themselves connected to vast distribution networks. Planets scarred by industrial pollution watched as atmospheric cleaners larger than moons began filtering their air and water. Species on the verge of extinction due to habitat loss saw their worlds expanded through spatial manipulation that increased surface area without affecting gravity. How is this possible? Representative Kolthek whispered, watching his species' homeworld transform before his eyes. David's voice carried notes of satisfaction. We've been preparing for this moment for 8 centuries. Every world we've studied, every species we've analyzed, we've been designing solutions for their specific challenges. The infrastructure was already in place. We simply needed your consent to activate it. Images flooded the chamber's displays, human technicians working alongside alien scientists, sharing technologies that seemed like magic, even to advanced civilizations. Faster-than-light communication networks connected every inhabited world in real time. Medical technologies that could cure genetic disorders by rewriting DNA at the quantum level. Agricultural systems that could transform barren rock into fertile soil within hours. But perhaps most remarkably, the humans weren't seizing control. They were teaching, guiding, sharing their knowledge freely. Your species possess capabilities we lack, David explained. The Silicon Collective's crystalline matrices process information in ways that complement our quantum computing. The Hive Consortium's collective consciousness provides insights into large-scale organization that our individualistic thinking cannot match. Every civilization brings something unique. Veltar watched as representatives of his own people appeared on the display, working with humans to install stellar engineering equipment around their dying homeworld star. You're actually making us partners. We told you we don't want to rule. We want to build something greater than any single species could achieve alone. The transformation accelerated across the galaxy. Star systems that had been isolated for millennia found themselves connected through transportation networks that made distance meaningless. Species that had been enemies for centuries discovered that their conflicts had been based on resource scarcity that no longer existed. Ancient trade routes were replaced by distribution systems that could deliver anything to anywhere instantly. There will be adjustment periods, David warned. Some species will struggle to adapt to abundance after eons of scarcity. Others will find cooperation difficult after millennia of competition. We'll provide assistance where needed, but ultimately, each civilization must choose its own path forward. Representative Thokvul's mechanical voice carried new harmonics of curiosity. What about those who choose to remain isolated? Then they remain isolated, David replied. We're not forcing participation, but we believe most will find the benefits of cooperation too valuable to resist. As if to prove his point, emergency messages began flowing into the chamber from across the galaxy. Not distress calls, but expressions of wonder and gratitude. Species that had struggled for survival found themselves with resources beyond imagination. Civilizations that had stagnated discovered new frontiers opening before them. The quantum collective, whose existence depended on maintaining coherence across vast distances, suddenly found their consciousness stabilized by human-built anchor points. The nomad fleets who had wandered the galaxy for millennia searching for suitable worlds were offered entire star systems tailored to their specific needs. What happens to the Council? Veltar asked. What is our role in this new order? You adapt, David said. The galaxy still needs governance, but not the kind you've been providing. Instead of managing competition and scarcity, you'll be coordinating cooperation and abundance. It's far more interesting work. The Chamber's displays showed new institutions forming: the Interspecies Research Consortium, the Galactic Ecological Management Bureau, the Cultural Exchange Foundation. Each was staffed by volunteers from multiple species, with humans serving as advisors rather than leaders. In 5 years, David continued, we'll reconvene to assess progress and make adjustments. In 10 years, we hope to begin expansion into neighboring galaxies. In a century, if all develops well, scarcity and conflict will be concepts that future generations learn about only in history lessons. As the transformation continued, something unexpected happened in the council chamber. Representatives who had been rivals for millennia began talking to each other, not about territorial disputes or trade negotiations, but about possibilities. What wonders could they build together? What discoveries awaited them in this new galactic civilization? Veltar stood slowly, his ancient form straightening with newfound purpose. Ambassador Kane, he said formally, the Galactic Council hereby accepts humanity's guidance in establishing a new form of galactic civilization. We pledge to work toward the advancement of all species and the expansion of life throughout the universe. A warm chuckle emerged from the communicator. Then welcome to the future, Supreme Counselor. I think you'll find it remarkable. As the session ended and representatives began coordinating with their homeworlds for the transition, Representative Kolthek called out one final question. David, you mentioned earlier that hostile fleets were mobilizing against Earth. What would you have done if we had refused your terms? The silence stretched for a long moment before David responded. You would have woken up tomorrow morning convinced that you had made the correct choice. Within days, you would have begun questioning that conviction. Within weeks, you would have realized that continuing your previous path was impossible, and within a month, you would have voluntarily requested exactly what we offered today. Kolthek's insectoid form went very still. You were never actually giving us a choice, were you? David's final words carried the gentle certainty of someone who had spent 8 centuries preparing for this exact moment. There's always a choice, Representative. We just ensured that all available options led to the same destination. 6 months had passed since what historians would later call the Great Transition. The Galactic Council Chamber, once a place of political maneuvering and territorial disputes, had become something entirely different. Representatives from nearly 1,000 civilizations still gathered here, but now they came as partners in the greatest collaborative effort the galaxy had ever seen. Supreme Counselor, Veltar looked out through the chamber's transparent walls at a view that still took his ancient breath away. Where once there had been empty space between the neutron stars, now a vast network of crystalline structures connected the stellar bodies in geometric patterns that served both practical and aesthetic purposes. The engineering involved was beyond anything the Council had previously imagined. Ambassador David Kane materialized in the center of the chamber, not through transportation beam this time, but by simply stepping out of what appeared to be folded space itself. The casual display of technological mastery no longer shocked the council members. They had grown accustomed to humanity's seemingly magical capabilities. "Progress report," David said without preamble, and the chamber's displays came alive with data that painted a picture of transformation beyond anything they had dared hope for. Species that had been on the verge of extinction were now flourishing. The dying homeworlds had been restored to ecological balance. Wars that had raged for millennia had simply stopped, not through force or intimidation, but because the underlying causes, resource scarcity, territorial disputes, ideological conflicts, had become irrelevant in a galaxy of abundance. The Rigel Collective reports a 400% increase in agricultural output, David announced. The Silicon Dynasty has successfully merged their crystalline computing with our quantum matrices, creating processing power that surpasses both technologies individually. The Nomad fleets have established permanent settlements in 17 different systems, each optimized for their specific cultural needs. Representative Koltek, whose own species had been among the most skeptical of human intentions, spoke with genuine wonder in his voice. "My people have gone from struggling to feed our population to having surplus food that we're sharing with newly contacted civilizations. Our scientists are working on projects we never thought possible." "That's the most remarkable aspect," added Counselor Zethrai. "The humans haven't just solved our problems, they've given us the tools to solve them ourselves. My crystalline matrices are now processing calculations that used to require entire research stations." David nodded approvingly. "Knowledge shared is knowledge multiplied. We've always believed that the best solutions come from collaborative thinking across different cognitive frameworks." The displays showed something that would have been unthinkable just months before. Mixed crews working on projects that spanned multiple star systems, humans, crystalline beings, energy entities, machine intelligences, and dozens of other life forms collaborating on engineering projects that were reshaping the fundamental structure of the galaxy. "We're building something unprecedented," David continued. "Not just a galactic civilization, but a template for how intelligence can organize itself on cosmic scales. Every species contributes their unique perspective, creating solutions none of us could have developed alone." Representative Thoughtful of the Machine Collective processed this information with what might have been satisfaction. "Our efficiency algorithms combined with organic intuition have increased productivity in ways our models couldn't predict. The synergy is remarkable." Veltar leaned forward, his ancient mind still trying to fully grasp the scope of what had been accomplished. "You mentioned neighboring galaxies during our last meeting. Are we truly ready for such expansion?" David's expression grew thoughtful. "Ahead of schedule, actually. The Andromeda Preparation Project has established preliminary contact with 17 different civilizations. Most are interested in learning about our cooperative model. A few are skeptical. The holographic display shifted to show the Andromeda galaxy, but instead of the distant spiral of stars they expected, it revealed a galaxy already marked with the geometric signatures of human engineering. Streams of energy connected star systems in patterns that suggested vast ongoing projects. "You've already been working there," Koltek said, though it was barely a question. "For the past 3 centuries, David confirmed. "Andromeda is where we relocated the populations from systems that needed ecological restoration here. It's also served as our testing ground for large-scale civilization engineering. The lessons learned there have made our work in this galaxy much more effective." Silence filled the chamber as the implications sank in. Humanity hadn't just been preparing to transform one galaxy. They had been simultaneously working on multiple galaxies, testing their methods, refining their approaches. "How many galaxies?" Veltar asked quietly. "Currently, we have active projects in 7 galaxies within this local group," David replied. "Each one serves a different purpose: research, agriculture, cultural preservation, technological development. The ultimate goal is to create a network of interconnected galactic civilizations." The display expanded to show the local galactic group, revealing streams of energy and matter flowing between distant spirals of stars. The scale was so vast that even species accustomed to thinking in terms of galactic distances found it difficult to comprehend. "You're not just transforming civilizations," Zethrai said with something approaching awe. "You're organizing the universe itself." "We're helping it organize itself," David corrected. Intelligence tends toward complexity and cooperation when given the proper conditions. We simply provide those conditions and let natural processes take their course. New data began flowing across the displays, reports from exploration, teams that had made contact with civilizations in distant galaxies, technological breakthroughs achieved through intergalactic collaboration, cultural exchanges that were creating art and philosophy on scales never before imagined. What about the species that remain skeptical? Thoughtful asked. Surely not everyone embraces this transformation. David's expression became more serious. There are always those who prefer familiar suffering to unfamiliar possibilities. We don't force participation, but we also don't allow obstruction. If a civilization chooses isolation, they receive it. Complete isolation from the growing network of cooperative species. Eventually, most choose to join, he continued. When they see their neighbors flourishing while they remain stagnant, the choice becomes obvious. It usually takes a generation or two for the transition to complete. Veltar stood slowly, his ancient form moving with new vigor that the transformation had brought to his species. Ambassador Kane, on behalf of the Council and all the civilizations we represent, I want to express our gratitude. You could have simply conquered us, imposed your will through force. Instead, you've elevated us to become partners in something greater than any of us imagined possible. David smiled, and for the first time since the Council had known him, the expression seemed entirely genuine and warm. Conquest was never the goal, Supreme Counselor. We didn't want subjects, we wanted colleagues. The universe is vast and full of wonders, but it's also full of challenges that require the best efforts of all intelligent life working together. As the session drew to a close, representatives began discussing projects that would have been impossible under the old system. Joint expeditions to explore distant galaxies, collaborative research into the fundamental nature of consciousness, artistic endeavors that would span multiple star systems. David began to fade as the transport beam engaged one final time. The next phase begins soon, he said as his form became translucent. We're ready to start teaching consciousness manipulation to willing species. The ability to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, to experience time as a navigable dimension rather than a linear constraint. As he vanished completely, his final words echoed through the chamber. Welcome to cosmic citizenship. The real adventure is just beginning. The council members sat in contemplative silence, each processing what they had heard. Humanity had not just declared war on the old galactic order. They had declared the beginning of something unprecedented in the history of the universe. And every species that chose cooperation over competition was invited to help build it. Outside the chamber windows, the networked galaxies continued their ancient dance, but now that dance had purpose, direction, and the promise of wonders yet to come. The age of scarcity and conflict was ending. The age of abundance and collaboration had begun. And somewhere in the vast network of interconnected civilizations, humanity continued planning their next impossible dream, teaching the universe itself to evolve.